leaves us with 2 acts to go. And we've got 2 quite familiar names to close out our evening this evening. First of those, our penultimate act, from Hull, Rikki Arundel.
So the first thing you might think when you hear my voice is, she's not from Hull. But you'd be wrong, because my mum actually was from Hull. My granddad was a trawler skipper. My grandma ran a pub, which is probably why I drink like a fish. The second thing you might think when you hear my voice is, well, she wasn't born female, and you'd be right. I was born with a male body and a female brain, but it just took me 50 years before I realized that having a female brain was not the disadvantage. I also discovered it's much easier to change a man's body than it is to change a woman's mind. I spent most of my life trying to become the woman that my mother always wanted me to marry. You may have noticed that I have now changed my identity to non-binary, and I go by they, them pronouns. And I like this because often as a trans person, a non-binary person, I find I'm the only trans or non-binary person in the room. So when you use non-binary, they, them pronouns, it feels like there's more of us and it's less lonely. So being trans can be quite difficult. Especially when people read me. Now, read me means that they sort of figured out that I'm trans, but they have to hide their interest in case other people might think that they are weird. I was in a supermarket and I saw this young teenage girl clocked me and read me as trans, and she scooted off to her mum and whispered. Her mum, cool as a cucumber, didn't react, just carried on looking for the butter. Then she reached in for the butter, and as she did, she slyly glanced over her shoulder. I thought I was ready for it, stood there, waved. The problem was that she was going the opposite direction to me. So every time she went down a new aisle, she hit me once more. Utter embarrassment. Then I went to a festival of mind, body and spirit, and I saw a couple of women notice and read me. And you can always tell it's the second glance and the whispered comment to the friend. Oh, don't look now, but there's a transgender over there. Anyway, I ignored them. I was on my way to the toilets and just doing my business. I heard them come in. I heard somebody say, well, I don't think it should be allowed, said one. In New York, they have separate toilets for transgenders now. I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting. So one occupied the toilet seat on the left of me and the other on the right, and they continued this conversation over me, completely unaware that I was there. It's just not right. I mean, you just don't know what to say, do you? Well, I washed my hands and dried, couldn't let them get away with it. So I just stood there and waited, waved, they blushed, they fucked off. Now, kids are very different. They're not so subtle at all. Okay? Kids walk, especially the kids in my street, and they would say things like, "Yeah, you're a man or a woman?" I said, "No." One or the other. No, I don't. Oh, do you go to bed with men or women? Oh, darling, I'm so old that I hardly like to limit my options. But they said, so have you had it cut off? I said, don't cut it off. They peel back the skin, they cut the bit out the middle, they turn it inside out and pop it on. They go, ah! Strangely, I seldom get 4 questions. I did get a visit from the 2 police officers. We've had a complaint. You've been speaking to children in a sexually explicit manner. I said they asked sexually explicit questions. I gave them detailed sexually explicit answers. I can explain it to their parents and be like, no problem, no problem. But sometimes things do get a little bit more tense. I was the victim of a hate crime. Had a gang of about 20 teenagers throwing mud and stones and insults at my house for weeks. And, quite literally, then they would disappear into the back alleys. In Hull, we call them 10-foots. If you want to work that out, actually, it's because they're 10 foot wide. But basically, they're just dark back alleys. I called 999 so many times that instead of them saying, 999, what's your emergency? They just simply said, oh, hi, Rikki, is it happening again? The police came, the kids just disappeared. Finally, one night, they were hurling mud at the walls and I just completely lost it. Now, my house then was painted cream on the outside. And basically, with all the mud, it now looked like my dad's favourite pudding, spotted dick. So I grabbed a metal pole, rushed out there. I goes, "Come on, you little bastard!" I was so angry. And one lad stood there, mud in hand. I said, "Why are you doing this?" He said, "Were you a man or a woman?" I said, "No." Dropped my weapon. He said, "Well, you've got to be one." I said, dropping his mud. I said, "No, I don't." And more kids came up, all asking questions. Suddenly, I was surrounded by 20 kids delivering a transgender awareness workshop and the green outside my house. That was actually the end of the problem. It all vanished after there. So it does go to prove that the spoken word is mightier than the metal pole.
Oh.
Fantastic.
Nice one, Rikki.